The great halls of the palace stood empty of the usual courtly clamor. Sunlight filtered through high arched windows, casting long geometric shadows across the polished floor. In the center of the royal chamber, Shahjahan sat perfectly still. Beside him, Taj Mahal rested, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the gardens met the sky. There was no need for speech. They had spent years building a world within these walls, a life defined by shared rhythms and quiet understanding. When he turned to look at her, she met his eyes with a steady, calm intensity that anchored him. It was a rare stillness in a kingdom built on shifting political tides. He reached out, his hand resting near hers on the stone surface, feeling the cool temperature of the marble beneath his fingers. They were two figures caught in a moment of absolute equilibrium. Every dream they had nurtured together, every laughter-filled evening, seemed to manifest in the heavy, peaceful air of the room. Outside, the empire moved forward, but within this space, time seemed to hold its breath. This was the heart of their world, a sanctuary carved from stone and devotion, where the weight of the crown vanished, leaving only the simple, unbreakable connection between two people. They remained there as the sun shifted, watching the light crawl across the floor, content in the silence that promised an eternity of such days. The change arrived not with a roar, but with a shallow, labored breath that cut through the silence of the chamber. Taj Mahal slumped against the cushions, her hand slipping from his grip. Shahjahan stood, his movements sharp and uncoordinated. He called for the healers, his voice echoing against the cold stone walls, but the frantic activity that followed brought no reprieve. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the scent of bitter herbs and the frantic pace of servants moving through the corridors. He watched as the light faded from her eyes, a slow dimming that felt like the sun being pulled from the sky. The healers stepped back, their heads bowed. The world he had built collapsed in a single hollow heartbeat. He reached out to touch her, but the warmth was already retreating. Outside, the palace continued its routines, but inside, the silence had transformed. It was the suffocating weight of an abyss. He stood motionless, his hands trembling, staring at the space where her presence had anchored his entire existence. The foundation of his world had been torn away. The silence in the chamber finally broke, not with a sob, but with the sharp, rhythmic strike of a signet ring against a wooden table. Shahjahan stood, his eyes fixed on the empty space where his queen had rested. He did not call for the court to mourn. He called for the architects. Couriers were dispatched before the sun had fully set, their horses kicking up dust as they galloped toward the furthest reaches of the empire. He demanded the finest white marble, specifying stone that possessed a translucent, almost living quality. He spent his nights hunched over drafting tables, his fingers tracing lines that would defy the finality of the grave. The royal treasury was opened, gold flowing out to secure the services of thousands. He summoned the greatest minds from across the borders, offering whatever price was required. The palace transformed into a nerve center of industry. He walked the grounds, pointing to the riverbank, his movements precise. The blueprints grew, each line a promise to bridge the chasm between life and death. As the first shipments of stone arrived, he stood at the edge of the site, watching the heavy carts roll in, knowing the foundation was finally being laid. The riverbank transformed into a landscape of dust and thunder. Thousands of hands moved in unison, a rhythmic pulse that defied the stillness of the surrounding plains. Under the relentless glare of the midday sun, the air grew thick with the fine, white powder of pulverized marble. Artisans stood on towering scaffolds, their chisels biting into the stone with a constant, metallic ring that echoed across the water. Shahjahan watched from the perimeter, his presence a silent, unmoving anchor amidst the chaos. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the work did not cease. Torches flared to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the rising walls. The labor became a cycle of light and dark, a relentless pursuit of perfection that ignored the passage of time. Each arch was measured to the millimeter, each dome curved to capture the shifting light of the moon. Skilled hands pressed precious stones into the marble, creating intricate patterns that seemed to breathe with the memory of his queen. The structure grew, stone by heavy stone, a skeletal frame of white rising from the earth. Every strike of a hammer was a heartbeat. Every block laid a defiance of the void she had left behind. The monument was no longer just a project. It was a living, breathing testament. The last wooden scaffold groaned and fell, clearing the view for the first time in decades. Silence reclaimed the riverbank. The structure stood complete, a mountain of white marble rising against the pale morning sky. As the sun crested the horizon, the first rays struck the dome, turning the stone into a glowing, ethereal beacon. It was no longer a site of labor, but a singular, frozen moment of perfection. Every inlay of precious stone caught the light, casting soft colors across the polished surfaces. Shahjahan stood at the water's edge, his gaze fixed on the reflection. The void he had carried for so long had found its shape. The monument did not merely mark a grave. It held the weight of a memory that refused to fade. It stood as a permanent promise, a silent poem etched in stone that would outlast the empire itself.